All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's weeks are off to a great start. We are really getting started strong this week. So I'm Devin Bronstein, Director of the Illinois Office of Broadband, joined by some of my colleagues, our subject matter experts today, who you'll hear from a qualification process for the BEAD Back to Connect Illinois Round 4. So this is a really big milestone that we are launching this pre-qualification opportunity today. So let's dive in. Here you'll see an overview of our agenda. So we'll talk through three main buckets of topics. First, we'll do a recap of the BEAD program, the timeline, the basics of what you should know. Then we'll walk through an overview of the qualification process. So what do you ultimately need to demonstrate in order to qualify to participate in the BEAD program? And then we'll do a zoom in on the pre-qualifications process. So what requirements can you meet at this point now before the sub-grantee selection process begins? How do you participate and how can you engage and get support? All right, so first, a few quick recap slides on the BEAD program. I think most folks in this room, in this virtual room, are hopefully deeply familiar with BEAD now. But in case we have any new faces, the BEAD program stands for the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. And the goal of BEAD is to connect all households, so unserved, underserved households and businesses in Illinois, to quality and affordable broadband internet. Illinois has been allocated $1.04 billion to achieve this in 5 years. We are subject to the requirements of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA, which is the federal agency administering this program. But now we kind of have this opportunity to get started and really make it our own here in Illinois. So you'll see some requirements up on the slide. We'll have a 1-year sub-grantee selection process. Following that, a 4-year deployment process. We'll prioritize projects that include fiber, but of course we know we'll ultimately be looking for a mix of technologies to achieve our goals. We'll have broadband affordability requirements to make sure that we can meet that goal of ensuring that everyone can afford broadband, and lots of other requirements here. So before we dive into the main topic today, you may or may not have heard the news, but on Thursday, our initial proposal, Volume 2, was approved by NTIA. So I believe we are the 11th state whose Volume 2 has been approved. We are charging ahead in the first group of the pack of the states and territories in the U.S. So a really exciting milestone. This was after publishing that proposal this fall for public comment, incorporating public comment, and going through lots of rounds of feedback and curing with NTIA this winter and spring. So really exciting that this was approved. And what does this mean for the program? A couple of things. So what the initial proposal contains is an outline of how Illinois will go about the sub-grantee selection process. So at a high level, the rules, the structures, the scoring mechanisms, the strategy that will govern this 1-year process to select all of the broadband providers to meet the goals of the BEAD program. So if you are interested in participating in BEAD, whether you are a veteran and have been to all of our webinars or you are new here, highly encourage you to take a look at that Volume 2. It is long, but it has a wealth of information that will kind of get you up to speed and ready to go when that sub-grantee process opens. So I will drop the link in the chat once I am done speaking here. The second milestone is that this is one of 2 milestones that we have to meet in order to get that green light to launch our sub-grantee process. So really exciting that we are kind of halfway there. And that next big milestone is the approval of our challenge process map and data, which we are hoping for this summer. So this brings us to our timeline here. You can see everything that we have kind of checked off to date. We published a 5-year action plan. Our initial proposals are now approved. We went through a challenge process where nonprofits, local governments, and providers could actually tell us what might have been wrong on the map and provide evidence to help us correct it. So we are finalizing that data. We put out a brief request for input RFI process on how we're planning to divide up the map from a kind of technical project area unit standpoint. And now we are in this final stage before that formal sub-grantee selection process kicks off. So the pre-qualification process, and my colleague John will talk more about that in a few minutes. After we go through the pre-qualification process, the formal sub-grantee selection will kick off likely early fall. And then once we have all of our provisional winners, we will submit that final proposal to NTIA to get the green light to actually start building out and deploying. And last slide here, this is a little bit more of a deep dive on what that looks like once we launch our sub-grantee process. So it will be a 3-wave process. In the first wave, we'll prioritize or we'll accept applications for projects that include all fiber deployment and include hard to serve areas. In wave 2, we'll sort of publish the remaining project area units following the provisional winners, kind of filling in those gaps, opening it up to all eligible technologies. And then finally in wave 3, this is optional, but in case we need it, this is where we'll make sure that every single project area is picked up. So by the time we finish our sub-grantee process, every eligible area is claimed by a provider and will get funding to be connected. So with that, I think this is the end of the intro section. I will hand it off to John Wilkins to take us through qualification.
Okay, thanks, Devin. Is my audio okay? Yep. Give me a thumbs up, Devin. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
By the way, I think Illinois can claim 9th, not 11th place. I think A going in alphabetical order, but I also saw Oregon put out a release saying they were 11th. So I think we can back into saying we were in the top 10. So that's just an aside. So for the next little while, we're going to walk through what the pre-qual process looks like. Before I jump into this next set of slides, though, I just wanted to add one thing to what Devin said. So absolutely, everyone interested in the BEAD program in Illinois should get your hands on the final approved volume 2 that NTIA approved last week. Make sure you're very familiar with it. It's long, has a lot of information in it. But the thing that you should keep in mind is, as detailed as it is, there's going to be additional, I'm going to call it supplemental, clarifying information the state's going to be providing over the summer. So view volume 2 as the overall structure, a lot of the rules, but it is not the end of the story. And so we will be providing formal information, office hours, all kinds of technical assistance as we go forward. So start with volume 2 and then be ready to sort of continue to supplement your understanding of how the program is going to work. Okay, so now let's talk about pre-qualification. I guess go ahead and go to the next slide, Matt. So just to get started, those of you that have been looking at BEAD in Illinois or other states should be familiar with this. So the federal structure for the BEAD program, so the NTI overall structure that every state has to follow, has these 7 categories of qualifications, right? So any entity receiving a BEAD subgrant as a result of the BEAD program in a given state must be qualified in these 7 categories. Financial capabilities, managerially able to execute a project, technically able, in compliance with both a set of specified federal rules and then some other state requirements. You have to be a record of being operationally capable of not just deploying, but operating a broadband network. There are disclosures around ownership of the entity that in some cases will be straightforward, in other cases may require a little bit more disclosure. And then importantly, given all of the recent federal and state grant programs, information about other sources of public funding and how good of a steward has your entity been of that. Now, let me just make a kind of a general comment here, which is those of you that have done state grant programs, federal grant programs, FCC programs, I mean, this should be a reasonably familiar list. Nothing unusual really in the scheme of grant programs that you have to demonstrate your bona fides in these categories. The thing to keep in mind about BEAD in Illinois is that while in general, these categories should be familiar to you, as we'll talk about, we're going to try very hard to not require you to be constantly kind of reinventing the wheel. And so if in some of these categories you participated in prior Connect Illinois rounds that have very similar requirements, we're going to try very much to streamline that for you. On the other hand, BEAD and BEAD in Illinois is going to be a little bit different than what you might have been used to. And so that it's just that nuance that we really want to emphasize here. So the main thing I want to emphasize as we get into the rest of the slides is you will probably, anyone that has done a prior grant program, for example, any of the FCC programs, is familiar with a general pre-qualification process that is more of a gating process, right? So in the FCC context, for example, the short form application that you may have done in RDOF or CAF2, where it's a binary, you submit application of qualifications, it's reviewed by the government, and then you're told, are you in or you're out? We're not doing it that way for BEAD in Illinois, which is going to be a little bit different. What we're going to do with Pre-Qual in Illinois is a bit more of a rolling process that's designed, frankly, to be as efficient and easy as possible, not just for providers, but for the state. So I'm going to now talk about what that looks like. And just key thing to keep in mind, Pre-Qual in Illinois is going to be more of a rolling process, not a binary gating process. Okay, so let's go and go to the next slide. Okay, so and this is what I was just saying. So to start at first principles, what the federal requirements for BEAD actually say with respect to qualifications is really that at the end, when an entity has been awarded a sub-grant of BEAD funds and is actually going to be the awardee, they must be qualified. That's what the federal requirement is. The timeline and process by which the state arrives at that determination is up to the state. And so in Illinois, we're going to actually have, like as I was saying, kind of a rolling, actually 4-stage process by which those qualifications can be demonstrated. And our goal is to give you the earliest bite at the apple, starting today, to demonstrate those qualifications to the extent either it's straightforward or you just want to get it out of the way. We encourage you to do that because frankly, the more things that are off the table as the process moves forward, the better for everyone. But that said, it's going to be a controlling, an evolving process. And we do expect some entities will be continuing to demonstrate and engage with the state on qualifications as the whole grant process moves forward, even to the end. And remember, the overall goal from the state is we want people to be qualified. Our goal is not to kick people out. Our goal is to have people in, because the more participation and competition the state has, the better the program will function. So that's what's informing this approach in the state. Okay, so just starting on the left on the blue. So here's where we are today. So as of today, June 17th, we are opening the pre-qualification period, okay? Now, on the one hand, as I was just saying, I mean, this is not mandatory necessarily, but it is strongly, strongly, strongly encouraged that anyone that's interested in BEAD grants in Illinois engage in this process. And we'll walk through the next couple of slides why. And so we're going to have we'll walk you through in a second what the portal looks like. We've got a nice portal set up where you can essentially go through in a structured way all 7 of those categories, give us information, upload documents, and essentially start to engage with the state and the review team quite early here in June to allow us to see your qualification materials, review them, either tell you that you're all set or give you feedback. And like everything in life, it's better to start early and not be crunched for time at the end. Okay, so on the one hand, we have this pre-qual starting now. Now, that said, if for some reason you don't engage in this current pre-qual window, if there's a certain issue that we're not able to resolve, you can proceed into the application period. And here's another second important concept. There's actually 2 kinds of qualifications in a conceptual sense. There are, I'm just going to say, entity level qualifications, right? So non-project specific is what it says on the left-hand blue box here. Example, a company has 3 years of audited financials that just shows that you are a financially viable going concern. So that's a nice general non-project specific qualification. There will be other qualifications though that are specific to the project. Here would be an example. A small ISP in one corner of Illinois may be highly operationally qualified to operate a given reasonably small project in areas where they've got operating experience. They may or may not be operationally qualified to operate a statewide network. And so on the one hand, operationally qualified providers can be done in a reasonably simple way to say you're able to apply. But then when you actually are putting in an application for a specific project or a specific set of PAUs, there'll be additional project-specific information required. So just think about that. That's a very good reason, for example, to do the preliminary pre-qual now, get us comfortable and get us and you comfortable with all of those non-project specific qualifications. So as the process moves forward, we can focus much more on the project specific, which of course will be somewhat more detailed. Okay, so in the application period, you're going to be asked for additional project specific qualifications, and then if we've not yet been resolved in the pre-qual period, you may also be providing additional information in the main application process related to your non-project specific qualifications, okay? And then as the process moves forward, so end of the application period is when the state will have made at least its preliminary selections. The state will then be organizing all that information into the final proposal, which has to go back to NTIA for final review before funds can actually start to flow. We may be requiring additional qualification information there. I mean, remember, ultimately, NTIA has to agree with the state's determinations around who's qualified. So there may be some back and forth where NTIA may have given us some additional specifications. We may need to ask for more. And then before the state will enter into the final grant agreement, even after NTIA has approved it, there may be additional things required. The one very specific example here that's on the right-hand side of this page is the final letter of credit, which of course we've been hearing a lot about, and we will no doubt continue to talk about a lot as we go forward. The actual letter of credit, the real issued instrument, has to then be provided before the final grant agreement is issued. And so whatever else is true, that will be the final qualification required, right? So everything else is all set. The final qualification from a financial standpoint will be issuing that letter of credit. That won't actually happen until the very last step of the process. Okay, so big picture, it's an evolving process. We want to start early with knocking out as many things as possible for as many providers as possible. And then as we start working through the process itself, there'll be some project-specific qualifications. There may be follow-up clarifications. So an evolving process, but starting early is always the best way to go. Okay. So hopefully my last slide made these points clear, but just to recap them, why participate now, given that technically you might not have to? First, it's a really good way to make sure you're immersed and your company is immersed in the BEAD requirements, right? There's no substitute for actually saying to your finance group, okay, here's the information we need for pre-qual, and working through the real requirements in your company. So step one, or item number one. Two, it will reduce your and our administrative burden significantly to knock out as many things in pre-qual. And then three, hopefully speaks for itself. The more things that we can go ahead and just check off as being done for your entity, the lower the risk of any kind of complication, risk, or delay as the process moves forward. Okay, go ahead, Matt. Okay, now here's an important nuance on the timing. Okay, so the pre-qual process is open today, June 17th. Okay, you could submit everything in the next 2 hours if you'd like to. We encourage you to do that if you can. On a rolling basis, starting this week, as things are submitted, our review team will look at what's provided and provide feedback. And so one way to think about this pre-qual process is, again, it's less of a black box. You submit a bunch of stuff and then we go quiet and you hear a thumbs up, thumbs down at some point in the future. This will be an evolving process. If our review team has a question about something you provided, we will reach out to you. Important interim milestone here. So July 9th, so what about 4 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, is what we're calling the priority review deadline. Anything that you can submit before July 9th, what the state will then commit is to get you feedback we can call it curing if you'd like, but feedback, request for clarification prior to the official opening of tranche one, of round one. So again, going back to what I was saying, if you can get all of at least your first attempt at pre-qual in by July 9th, we will then commit to get back to you full feedback, so you'll know basically where you stand with those initial non-project specific qualifications before the first grant round opens, and that will be to everyone's benefit. Okay. And then to the extent we might say, well, look, actually there's 3 or 4 questions or 3 or 4 changes we need, that can continue to be resubmitted as we go forward. So again, it's a rolling timeline starting on June 17th, and we're just going to try to front load as much as possible. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. And then just to make it as clear as possible, here's the possible paths. So you submit your pre-qual materials, hopefully starting soon. Top branch. If everything that is submitted for pre-qual is approved, you will be getting considered approved at minimum for all of the non-project specific requirements, right? So as you get into then each round, you may have additional project specific things we need, but you will be considered fully approved for all the non-project specific requirements. If you submit something and the feedback is these had some issues or we need some revisions, we'll give you that feedback. You can resubmit sort of at any time as the process goes forward. You're free to resubmit as quickly as possible. So while we're still during the pre-qual window, and we will kind of commit to as quick a turnaround as we can, with the goal being to get as many entities to full initial qualification before the round starts. But if needed, there's no hard deadline, or well, there's not a deadline before the grant round start. So if there's still an issue that's outstanding with respect to some set of pre-qual, it is okay if that is still being developed and provided as part of the main grant rounds. And again, this just goes back to the principle that from a federal perspective, what matters is all the qualifications are documented prior to basically the state asking for grant approval. And so we're going to give folks the full benefit of that time if needed. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's both the high level and a bit of the specifics. Maybe the next section is just to walk through the portal itself, just to give you a bit of a quick technical overview of how to actually submit information. Devin, do you want to pause for a second? Were there any questions that came up in that first section that we should talk about now, or just go on to the next one?
Why don't we keep moving in case the questions are answered through the next section, and then we'll do questions at the end.
Okay. Okay, great. So the next section is really just kind of a much more brass tacks, practical walkthrough of how the pre-qual process will work. So let's just walk down the road here. So step one, and actually I should have mentioned this, the companion to the pre-qual portal opening up is we have a full pre-qualification guidebook. Make sure you get your hands on that, review that while you're also looking at volume 2. But this is a pretty specific walkthrough of each of the categories of the pre-qual and tries to give you good examples of what we're looking for. And that said, as I mentioned with volume 2, we have no doubt that any given entity will look at some specific element of our pre-qual and think, how does this apply to my specific situation? And everything may not be completely prescribed yet. That's a great example of give us a draft version, we'll give you feedback and we'll work through it. So just because you don't recognize your particular entity-specific question when you read the pre-qual doesn't mean you're in trouble. It means just start working with us to figure out whatever specific interpretation we need for your situation. Okay, so step 2, access the pre-qual form, and we'll do that in a second. Step 3, go ahead and try to complete the form. And again, we'll walk through what it looks like, but at least the first version hopefully shouldn't be too difficult. There's been a set of, in addition to the template and the kind of the core categories, we have questions and opportunity to upload documents. So, step 3 and 4 is really executing the initial response to the pre-qual portal. Okay, step 5, hit submit. Step 6, make sure we've got your contact info, email. And then step 7, and this will maybe be a bit of a, kind of a looping process, look for feedback from the state on what you submitted, and we'll just work through it. And we'll walk down this road as many times as needed to get everyone to the end. Okay. So I won't belabor every single one of these. I think these slides are going to be available too, but just to kind of give you a quick glimpse. So on the website, on the Connect Illinois website, we should have access to the pre-qual guidebook. You can see a picture of it there. You can take a look at what the relevant submission templates look like. And actually, just to say one more thing about that. So the core portal is essentially a series of questions that go down through the major categories of qualification. And then for some of them, there are supplemental templates. And so what 1B is showing here, if you put your face about 2 inches from the screen, is one of the qualification categories is how good of a steward have you been of prior grants. And so there's a template that asks you to disclose every grant that you've received and some information about it. And that allows the state to review that information and confirm that you're qualified in that category. Okay. And then in a few places, there's opportunities for narrative responses. Again, we know it's not possible to take this kind of complex question and turn it into nothing but a series of yes/no questions. We tried to put some reasonable word limits on it to force everyone to be a good self-editor. But if you have a narrative response and you feel like you weren't able to communicate everything possible, that will be something we could probably talk about too. Okay. Step 2, you can see on the left, here's just a little glimpse of what one part of the form looks like. It's an Airtable form, and so it's set up to be nicely automated on the back end for us. You have to provide identifying information, tax number, type of entity you are, etc., contact information. So again, step 2, pretty straightforward. Okay, go on to step 3. So this is what I was just mentioning a second ago. So here's a existing broadband projects template. Download that. This, unless you've never done any grants at all before, will probably require a little bit of side work from someone in your company to just go through and get all the right specifics for the grants that are required to be filled out on this template. This, for example, we've tried to make the categories here as precisely applicable to different grant programs as possible. But that said, there easily could be a specific term that might be used in ACAM that isn't exactly the same as what we put in here. And so again, if you have interpretation questions, those are fair game for office hours or questions to us, but hopefully shouldn't be too hard. Okay, on to step 4. Sorry, did we skip the? Yeah, there we go. Actually, I haven't specifically talked about this yet, but just another important element of BEAD qualifications, kind of think about it as a 2-part submission to us. One is all of the requested information in the categories. And then the corollary is BEAD also essentially has a set of forward-looking commitments or past-looking certifications. And so in addition to providing information, there is a set of certifications where you're essentially certified to the state of Illinois. And you can see on the slide here, some things that are, somewhat straightforward, assuming you're providing information, but you're actually saying, yes, we certify that we are financially qualified as sort of a supplemental certification to the information provided. And again, you'll go through these, and most of these should be pretty straightforward. So you then take that certification form. That would be another example of a download that you would then provide back to us, sign it, and then upload it back to us. So that would be an example of a document exchange to us as part of the portal. Okay, step 4. We then sort of end the submission form with a series of questions that follow the 7 categories that I talked about. Okay, and then let's go ahead and go to the next couple of pages just to see. And so as you go through each of those questions, you'll be asked questions about your financial capability. You'll be asked to provide additional information. And again, these range from very straightforward to maybe requiring a little bit more digging around and investigation. So again, key thing is just start looking at it now so that we can iterate through any questions that you have. Okay. Yep, and people can just scan this list. So this is the 7 lists. Okay. The portal site hopefully should work very smoothly. You then submit everything. And again, just to really emphasize that, think about submission here. This isn't quite the usual, hitting send on on your college application or on your grant application. This is you submitting to us your best current first draft, your first attempt, for us to then review and give you feedback. So the reason I say that is, if you think you've got your information pretty well together, don't delay for 3 weeks just to get all, every senior official in your company to approve everything. Just submit it and let us look at it, and we can start working on it. I mean, there will be much bigger moments of truth as this process goes forward when you're committing the company to a grant agreement. But for now, err on the side of just get us information, hit submit, let us start working with you so we can get things moving as briskly as possible.
And if I could just add on that, John, make sure that you are getting everything together and submitting once versus piecemeal, and that'll help make for as efficient of a review process as possible.
Okay. Our system should give you a clear confirmation back. If you don't get that, that's definitely something to follow up with us about. But hopefully this should go very smoothly. And then just going back to the slide that we showed a little while ago. Hopefully we'll get a lot of folks relatively quickly up into the top section of this pass. But the main thing is keep, have someone in the company whose job it is to just, watch out for feedback and communications back from the state, and just make sure that if there is a specific feedback request that comes from us, someone is on task to run it down, and just make sure we have good brisk follow-up, because the time's going to go pretty quickly now the process is going. Okay, so Matt, I believe this is over to you to do the live demo for folks.
Yeah, let me just go ahead and do a new share over here. Okay, coming up, you should soon be able to see a copy of the web form. So this is the Airtable form that we talked about. So the Airtable submission form for Connect Illinois Round 4 pre-qualification has kind of some of the screenshots that you saw from earlier in the presentation. Just like many other forms where you see the red asterisks, those are required entries. Especially these early entries, they're going to be critical for us, that if you wind up going through a sort of an iteration with us where we give some feedback, please try to make sure that it's typed exactly the same here. You will also get some additional guidance, sort of like a tag number that we'll get to later, that will identify you as a prior submission. So, but the red asterisk fields are required. First is just general entity information about who you are, what type of organization you are, your tax ID number, and if you're applying as a private company, as a consortium, or as neither. So it's important to kind of get those tags answer as best as you can. In some of these cases, if depending upon what you answer, additional boxes will open up for fields where we need more information. In cases where you don't, where it's kind of straightforward, then those additional sort of clarification boxes don't necessarily appear. This is designed to kind of help you get through the form without having to answer questions that are irrelevant or kind of we're guessing about what might be asked. Contact information for who's the primary contact at your company. Whether it's if it's a first-time submission, you'll kind of, and as it should be the first time you go through the form, you'll kind of have that box checked. If it's a resubmission, we're going to ask for a recent submission ID that you submitted. So if that happens, you can go ahead and here, and you can click what will be a PQR number. These will be generated as you after the first time that you submit. And then if you do have some revisions or edits that you want to make sure that you flag it with the correct resubmission ID so that we can match your new submission to the file with the previous information that you've sent. We ask information whether or not you've been a previous Connect Illinois round 1, 2, or 3 submission. And if so, just check. And then, we can also, if you want the state to consider documents that were submitted in round 3, you can say yes, and then we'll go ahead and we'll look for it. If not, then that's fine. Again, if it's not necessarily something where, if you didn't apply for round 3, then that question doesn't even sort of show up. But if you did and you were awarded, then we asked for that information. There's some spots in here for free text, as John mentioned. So again, you can kind of see the word limits. Please try to respect that. It may make sense for you to do some of these write-ups in a separate document, or you can just type them in here and you can cut and paste them. It doesn't really matter. Some of the other documents where we think that you're going to have forms, such as financial documentation, we've just created a place for you to upload. But for some of these brief narratives, you can feel free to type them directly in here and then add. But this goes through all the different sections that we have in the pre-qualification guide. And then some of the certifications that John mentioned towards the end, you would upload here as well. Once you're done, here's that submit button that John was talking about. You can go ahead and submit. There is a question about whether the information submitted in the pre-qual form is confidential.
We can take questions at the end.
But we'll hold those questions for the end. So that's a brief walk through the form. If there are any other questions, at the end, I'm happy to kind of dive back into this. And if not, Devin, I think we can probably switch back to the presentation and kind of finish up there. All right.
And just as we, is this our last slide, Matt, before the wrap up? Because as we're switching slides, and I'll just make a coming attraction to Devin, you're going to probably say too, we will have regular office hours, we're calling them, now that the pre-qual process has started. So I am sure that as Matt was just walking through the forms, if we did a quick poll, probably everyone's got at least one question of, well, wait a minute, what does that mean exactly? And so one way we're going to try to support you is through a series of office hours. Basically, the staff from the state will be available in this kind of a format, and you can ask questions, and we'll keep track of the questions, and we'll try to make sure everyone gets the answers. But essentially, we'll just work through it both on a one-to-one and a one-to-many basis. And I probably jumped the gun without on the next section, Devin. So sorry about that. But
no worries. We'll happily get the extra promotion for office hours. So we will wrap up and then get into questions. I'll kind of recap any responses we gave in the chat, and then if folks have additional questions, start thinking about them and throwing those in the chat. But to cover next steps, you can go to the next slide. So we have a new landing page for all pre-qualification materials. If you haven't noticed, essentially our BEAD website is now broken up into different landing pages for each of kind of the big things that are happening. So we had one for the RFI, one for the challenge process, and now one for the pre-qual opportunity. So everything on this link and what was in my email this morning and what you'll get emailed after this will kind of give you everything you need. There is a guidebook that outlines in more detail what we shared today. There are links to templates. There is a link to the submission form that Matt just screen shared. And then, of course, we encourage everyone to complete our intake form, which is how you get tailored communication. And if you are new to this conversation, it probably means that you completed our intake form recently. So thank you for doing that. And now you'll kind of, be up to speed on all of these things, and you can decide what's most relevant to you. Do we have any other slides here before we open it up? No, just this beautiful closing. Just this beautiful closing image. All right. So with that, please put any additional questions in the chat, and I'm gonna go up to the beginning here and just kind of recap. So we will be sending out the slides and recording after the meeting, as well as posting them on our website. Let's see. So I see that some folks are kind of new to BEAD, which is fine, and that's great. We're so happy to have you here, whether or not you directly participate. I think it's really important to understand what this opportunity is, because it will hopefully be impacting your community over the next 5 years in a really positive way. So if you are a local government or a nonprofit or a local business, the answer to, would you be directly applying for these funds? Would residents be applying for them? So the answer is that, as you can tell, you do have to meet a series of requirements to qualify to be a BEAD sub-grantee. And one big piece of that is that applicant entity, that grantee, does need to have the ability to build and deploy broadband service. So that'll likely be an internet service provider. That could be a co-op, a utility. It could be a nonprofit internet service provider, a for-profit, a partnership, a corporation, any sort of collaboration. But that applicant does need to be able to provide broadband service. With that being said, if you are a representative from your local government, we encourage you to, spread the word that BEAD is happening and these opportunities are coming to get every household connected. Individuals do not need to do anything, but if you and your community do have a strong feeling about, one service provider that you're really excited about, maybe they hosted community meetings or you did a survey, on our application, we will be awarding points for local coordination and planning. So any evidence of community support, we would love to see that. I want to actually just briefly pass it to Nancy. She's available to kind of support making some of those connections and maybe connecting with providers who are interested in coming into your community. So Nancy, do you want to speak briefly to that?
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Illinois Extension has had the pleasure of ushering alongside other state-level organizations to prepare counties and communities for their broadband development goals. And so we have a lot of information about, who in the different counties and regions have done this work. And so if there are, new communities coming into the fore now that are interested in knowing what that local conversation has been so far, what the assessment efforts have been so far, you are welcome to reach out to us, and we are happy to get you in contact with some of your county level and regional level counterparts that you might want to discuss with before moving forward for your community level plans. And so I'll put some information in the chat. You're happy to go through Devin as well, but I will go ahead and put my email in the chat as well. And let me know, Devin, if I covered everything, or if you want to prompt me on anything else you think I should add.
Sounds great. And this feedback from folks also, I think, prompted us to want to schedule a BEAD 101, so more like an introductory session about some of your unanswered questions. So look out for that opportunity as well. Okay. So any sort of letter of credit requirements, exemptions, there's a space in the form for an explanation of how you would comply with that requirement. So we're not asking for anything at this point, just a high level sort of plan of how you intend to meet that requirement. John, I don't know if you want to say anything else about letter of credit, exemption, performance bonds here.
It's important to just look at, and this is going to seem very technical to new folks for the conversation, but NTIA at the end of last year released very specific guidance on letter of credit. It was called the letter of credit limited waiver. Maybe we can, as a do out, help share the link with folks that need it. But it's a short document. It's only a few pages long, but it lists in an extremely specific fashion what the acceptable approaches to the letter of credit qualification is. And so, as we said on this call, the actual issuance of the real letter of credit is not required until the very end when you've been awarded a grant. Right now, you just have to give us an acknowledgement that you understand the requirements and give us some sense of how you plan to do it. But ultimately, this is something where the NTI has been extremely clear on what's acceptable, what isn't, and you have to make sure you understand that. And as much as we can, we'll try to help you get there and give you time to figure it out, but that really is non-negotiable from the federal side.
Thanks. And again, in office hours, we're happy to help workshop to make sure that you understand what you'll need to do eventually. All right, moving ahead, is the information submitted in the pre-qual form confidential? So we have a statement from legal on this in the guidebook, but to summarize, we are subject to the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. However, if you mark anything confidential, that is confidential, it can be presumably excluded from FOIA requests, but please be judicious with how you mark things as confidential to make sure that we are also complying with FOIA. So the short answer is yes, but please mark it as confidential so we know. Can multiple users access the same application? So it's just a form on a software called Airtable. And so there's no account creation, there's no profile. Our recommendation is to look at the form, look at the guidebook, and gather all of your documents ahead of time, and then submit once. So you don't need access to a certain account. Just make sure you jot down the submission ID of your form. And so if you do need to include follow-up documents after the state's feedback, you'll link it to that. And so yes, anyone can do a follow-up submission, assuming they can link it to that ID. Hope that makes sense. Do you know, or do you have an idea when the first round of BEAD applications will be due? So I touched on this in the beginning slightly, but there are kind of two dependencies for us to launching wave 1 of the sub-grantee process. The first one is the approval of our volume 2 initial proposal, which happened last week. So we're halfway there. The second is the submission of our challenge process results to NTIA. And then the finalization of that challenge process map. And for those new to the challenge process in these terms, essentially, we started with a data set from the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, that indicated connectivity and service available at every address in the state. We then opened that up for feedback from certain eligible entities like nonprofits, local governments, and providers with evidence. There was a rebuttal phase. Now we're taking everything back and adjudicating it and kind of aligning on, what is the most accurate map that we have. So once we get approval on that map, we will publish it. That has to be out for 30 days, I believe, before that formal sub-grantee process opens. And in terms of how long each wave will be, that is all in our volume 2, and I think we'll probably go into that in more detail in an upcoming webinar. Would the funding be 100% funding of the project? I would point you to our volume 2 to look at the scoring approach. So we are definitely encouraging matches to make the BEAD dollars go far. John, if you wanted to add to that, feel free to jump in.
Right. At the federal level as well, there is a statutory target of a 25% match. And essentially what NCI has asked all the states to do is try to design programs to accomplish that at least wherever possible. So as Devin said, the actual rules for the Illinois program essentially will give you a better score if you require less funding. So that's essentially the indirect way of saying, yes, we want you to provide more match. I do think, though, just because if you think you're in an area where you need more grant funding than that 25% target, you should still pursue it because, it is permissible to ask NTIA to not apply that. I think what NTIA has made very clear is they want to see specific projects. They don't want to do that on a preemptive basis. They want to see what is the best possible award the state can make. But the overarching goal of BEAD is to reach everybody. And so I think, the question will be, Are there areas where higher funding is really the only way to get service there? And in that case, there is a path to do that. But the starting point is you should really try to dig deep and figure out what's the smallest funding request you can make, because that's how you score best under the rules.
Thanks, John. And again, in our volume 2, it kind of talks about the breakdown of scoring and how points are going to be awarded. So I just dropped in one piece from that table in the volume 2. All right, will there be any updates to the unserved and underserved locations for BEAD? Yes. So as shared, a preliminary map was shared before the challenge process in February. And an updated and final map will be shared later this summer. We don't know when this will be. It could be early August, perhaps. But again, there's a lot of dependencies, approvals that need to happen before that. It'll include results of the challenge process, as well as any enforceable commitments. So any new grant-funded, state or federal grant-funded programs that would make a location considered served because there's already there.
You know, Deb, you might want to just, given that we've got a couple questions on this, just also mention the PAU map that is available now. And I mean, just to tee it up quickly, you know, on the one hand, because the federal requirements for BEAD are very specific, and it's very clear that NTI has to do this final approval that Devin has mentioned a few times. On the other hand, there already has been a lot of work done on the maps going back several years now. So while we cannot say for sure that there will be no changes, in fact, I'm sure there will be at least a few small changes, maybe more than a few. We have a current version of the map up now for this. It's called the Project Area Unit Preliminary Map. That actually, if you look at it on the website, will give you a pretty good sense of where the BEAD funds are going to be available. Now, between now and the final NTI approval, there will be some changes, but it's a pretty close version of what the final draft's going to look like, we think. So if you haven't looked at it at all, I'd encourage you to look at that because it will give you a pretty good directional sense of where things are heading.
Thanks for that flag, John. Yes. And if you missed webinars on what a project area unit is, a PAU, those past presentations can be found at the link I just put in the chat. Our RFI submission period is closed. That was a non-binding voluntary opportunity to share your feedback on how we are dividing up every location in the state and then ultimately making them available for applications. But that PAU map is still up and hopefully helpful in helping you starting to think through project area units of interest. All right, I'm gonna look back and see if I missed anything here. But if folks have additional questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. Maybe just a couple of things to emphasize before we close out. I believe we mentioned the priority deadline and the regular deadline. So as of today, anyone can submit pre-qualifications. We'll be reviewing them with merit reviewers on a rolling basis. And we encourage you, if you can get your materials together in time by July 9th, to submit by that date, and it will sort of guarantee you enough time to get that feedback, refine your materials as needed, and resubmit. We're trying to avoid everyone having, you know, a ton to do later on in the process. So the earlier that we can all get your materials, feel good about, you know, you as an applicant, the better. It can help reduce delays down the line. It can take the administrative burden off. It can give you that certainty that, okay, I meet these baseline requirements, so I'm good to, you know, move forward with applying for BEAD. So July 9th is a priority deadline. If you want to be ahead of the curve, we really encourage it. We'll have office hours as soon as tomorrow to help you workshop your materials, answer questions. And then July 23rd is the final deadline for pre-qualifications. So if you apply or you submit your form by July 23rd, we'll give you feedback prior to the start of the sub-grantee process. Whether or not you have time to resubmit is kind of based on the volume that we get in of pre-qualification submissions, but we will try our best. Either way, it's still great to submit by the 23rd so you can get that initial feedback. Check that off the list ahead of the formal sub-grantee process. So July 9th and then July 23rd. Office hours every Tuesday at 10. I'm seeing one final question in the chat. Beyond BEAD, will there be a similar process for Digital Equity Act proposed projects? Yes. So we kind of have a separate work stream going for the Digital Equity Act, and I'll also throw the link in the chat here. But it's pretty well aligned with our digital equity plan, which is online, the implementation section. And the sort of big opportunity to look out for on that front is the office will be launching a statewide digital equity grant program. We have been doing some co-design workshops this spring and summer to get input on what that grant program should look like, as well as grant capacity building workshops to go over the basics of how do I make sure I qualify for a state grant? How do I write a strong grant application? So all of those are available online. And we encourage you to check them out. If you wanted to, weigh in with a group in your community, let us know, and we can certainly set that up. So the timeline for that is likely early fall is when that notice of funding opportunity would come out. And the Digital Equity Act links are here. Will an FAQ be released with the questions asked from today's webinar? Yes, so we will start up an FAQ document and link it on our website. Just give us a little time to take down the questions from the chat and write up answers. But yes, we'll try and have a pretty current running list of questions to make sure that everyone is getting the same information. All right. Well, thank you so much, John and Matt, for your support and wisdom today. And Nancy and Mike, as always, for hosting. And thanks, everyone, for joining. A strong crowd of 150. So looking forward to seeing your submissions. And don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. broadband@illinois.gov.
Thank you, everyone.